Hi, everyone. I'm Erik Brynjolfsson, and this is the Stanford Digital Economy Lunch Seminar. We're honored to have with us today Raffaella Sadun, a professor over at Harvard Business School. She's also a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. She's done some pioneering work on management practices, and today she's going to be talking about the demand for executive skills. I just learned that she has been recently honored as a Grand Official dell'Ordine El Merito della Repubblica Italiano. I'm sure I mispronounced that pretty badly. She speaks Italian, I don't. So that's basically equivalent of being knighted by the Italian government for in recognition of her work. And so welcome very much, Raffaella. We're looking forward to having you participate. Oh, and one more thing, let me just mention, if any of you have questions that you'd like to ask for her, just use the Q&A function, and I think we'll put a link in the chat so you can see that. And I'll pass on those questions to Raffaella. The basic plan is to have her get a chance to present for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have general discussion for the last 10 or 15 minutes. Raffaella, welcome, and please take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Erik. Thank you for having me here and for embarrassing me publicly in the first minute. That's fantastic. So I'm very happy to be here today. I'm going to present some new work that is joint with Joe Fuller, who's a professor at Harvard Business School, my colleague Stephen Hansen, he's at Imperial College, and Tejas Ramdas, who is actually a PhD student in computer science at Cornell. Before getting started, I wanted to give you a sense of why we are interested in this topic, understanding the demand for executive skills, and in particular, understanding the importance of and the demand for skills in C-suite executives. I hope you can all see my slides, Erik?
Yeah. Yep.
Perfect, great. So what's the background for that? I think right now, thanks to the availability of data, many researchers have been able to document that top executives matter for organizational performance. And many of you might know of seminal work done, for example, by Marianne Bertrand and Antonio Shore, who, many years ago started estimating managerial fixed effects. What are managerial fixed effects? It's basically, you can see in the data that certain managers are associated with better performance, different types of policies. In a sense, they seem to matter. This was for C-suite executives. Others have taken a more morbid approach to the question, looking at the exogenous variation in the departure of CEOs, meaning CEO death, for example, and seeing how that has resulted into differential performance. More recently, more data. I've been also doing work in this area, looking at, opening up what is the driver of this performance differential associated to managers. For example, people like Steve Kaplan at Chicago have looked at psychological traits, and more recently I've been looking with Oriana, Stephen, and Andrea Pratt at the behavior of managers. And I think that this is, very exciting line of research that somehow emphasizes the positives, the fact that managers matter. On the other hand, I think a little bit of it's a less celebrated aspect of managerial differentiation. But at the end of the day, for us to be able to identify the good managers, there have to be bad managers that are in office at any given point in time. And what that means, it's sorry if I use a little bit of a technical word, but it's basically an evidence. If we are able to estimate the effects of managers, there have to be some bad matches, some managers that are either not so good and they have been employed nevertheless, or managers that are just not good fit. They're not good matches for the companies that they run. And I think that understanding how the functioning of managerial labor markets, I think, is a first order question to be able to understand where this matching friction is coming from. And one key element for us to understand matching frictions is to be able to understand the demand for C-suite executives. For example, are firms aware of their needs? Are they able to articulate what their needs are? In one extreme, we might have pretty naive boards of directors that don't even know what they need. On the other hand, what are the skills that are expected by C-suite managers? Perhaps the problem is exactly the opposite. It's not that companies don't know what they look for, but they look for the impossible. And so it's harder to form these effective matches. So as you can see, this is, I think, something that requires understanding the demand for skills for C-suite executives. However, so far, this part of the, understanding demand has not been possible, in part because we didn't have the data to really dig into what type of skills are demanded at this top level of the organization. There are very rich data for the rest of the organization, not so much for C-suite executives. So this is where this paper comes in. I'm going to show you new research that is based on a large corpus of detailed C-suite job descriptions that span from the year 2000 to 2017. This is it's something that we've been able to gather thanks to a very fruitful collaboration with one of the top headhunting firms, global headhunting firms. And these documents are a goldmine because they provide a very detailed description of the skills that are explicitly demanded by firms. Now, they are a goldmine, they're fantastic, they're very rich, maybe even too rich, in the sense that they are free text and they are highly variable in the way in which these demands are expressed. So part of what I'll discuss today, it's how we went from free text to specific categories of skills demanded by firms over time. And for those of you that are familiar with machine learning, we're basically using an approach that is called transfer learning. So we know something, we basically developed a category of managerial skills, dictionary of managerial skills, and then we found a way to estimate whether the job descriptions included these skills. And the results of this analysis is that, first of all, there is a wide range of skills that are demanded of managers. Some of them have to do with very operational tasks, doing stuff, managing money. Others have to do with cognitive tasks, understanding, for example, a complex information. And others are what we would call more, on the softer side, interpersonal skills. And what we find is that there is wide heterogeneity for the demand for different skills across firms. So going back to the first questions, are firms aware of what they want? Well, they seem to exert a lot of effort in specifying the type of skills that they want. I will also cover one specific category of skills that attracted our interest, which is the role of the demand for social skills. And don't worry, I'll be more specific about what we mean by social skills. I'm just going to say it's not going around and hugging people and being nice and offering coffee. So it's not social skills the Italian way, but it's, it's social skills in the sense of empathy, really understanding who's in front of you and putting yourself in the shoes of the other people.
So Raffaella, can I ask a quick question?
Please.
When you talk about the firms demanding certain types of skills, what do you mean by the firm? The firm's not a person. Is it the board of directors? I've been on a board of directors, and there's some debate about what we should put in the job description.
It's exactly the board of directors.
Yeah,
so exactly. So you're right. I'm equating the board of director to the firm, but effectively, it's typically a subcommittee within the board of director that is in charge of the whole process. And so as you might have experienced, you sit together and you define and you craft this job description. So it's expression of the board of directors. Yeah. I'll go into the details of that too. So when we come, our analysis of social skills, and I hope to be able to, give you also some insights on some new results. What we approach this analysis as, we think about social skills almost like a technology. But instead of being a technology, it's a way, if you like, something that allows coordination and communication between different parts of the organization. And seeing that way, we then go into the additional data that we collected that allows us to understand what type of firms and what type of firm characteristics are more associated with the demand for social skills. And for one subsample of our data, we also look at the type of technological demand. So what type of technology and in the technological intensity, what type of skills are demanded as a function of that. I'll keep a little bit of surprise. I want to tell you more about it when we get there. So the plan for the next half hour or so, and it's going to be a little bit of a marathon, is to give you, first of all, a sense of the data, what type of data we use, the classification approach. I won't get into the details of the model, but I hope to give an intuition for the model and then finally the conclusions. Okay, so let me get into the data. As I said, this has been a really fun partnership with a top 5 global executive search firm, and many of you might know what these guys do, but essentially this is a fundamental intermediary in the market for human capital, especially for larger companies. And this is, it seems like a decade ago, but this is when the economy is still worried about, these things rather than the pandemic and all the stuff that have happened since February 2020. But it's a very important intermediary. About 80 to 90% of the largest firms, both in the UK, in the US and globally, use headhunters to find their C-suite managers. And what is important is that companies use headhunters even when they have an internal successor. This is because it gives them a good benchmark. So from that perspective, we have a pretty unique sense, thanks to this data, of the demand expressed by a large sample of firms. This is a process that takes anywhere from 90 days to a year. I've been personally involved in one that took 9 months. So, things can really get complicated. But what is important is that typically, this is, as I was saying a minute ago, it's a board that forms a committee who oversees the process. And this committee works in cooperation with the headhunter. And the work of the headhunter here, and that's our understanding of the role, is not so much to tell the committee what to write, but it's more to give a sense of how these needs are going to be expressed in the documents in terms of the structure of the document. What is key for us is that the document is an expression of the board itself, not the headhunter. So the board would, get together and create a rich and firm-specific description of the required competencies and skills that are going to be circulated to viable candidates. So documents have, to some extent, a similar structure, but the language is different. And this is what we use to define the demand for skills at the C-suite level. The documents are the entire corpus that of searches that were conducted between 2000 and 2017. We're talking about 4,700 documents. And some of these documents are from the same firm that went with the same headhunter multiple times over time, either to look for the same position in different years or to look for different positions in any given, within the same year. And maybe we'll get there. We use this variation as well. We look at how companies vary their demand for skills over time as well. Mostly these are CEOs and CFOs positions, although we have the other more functional and specialistic positions. And what you have to keep in mind is that this is by no means a representative sample. These are large firms. Many of them are publicly listed, and they are engaged in M&A activities and so forth. Mostly based in the United States, although some in Europe, and with a wide variety of industries. Okay. So let me go into the classification approach. As I said, job descriptions are really fun. You look at them, you read them. Some of them has this, very ambitious sentences, like you have the courage of your own convictions, even in the face of seemingly unsurmountable obstacles. So they really paint a pretty rich, pretty ambitious view of the position. Others are, if you like, a little bit more mundane. You demonstrate the following core competencies, and then they would go on with a list of bullet points of things that you should be doing or qualifications that you should have. Our problem is that all this stuff comes into free text. And so in order to be able to use this data, we need to find a way to classify it into something that is meaningful and is at the same time comparable across firms. So our approach, the way in which we decided to move is in two steps. The first step is to find a reliable and a comprehensive, but at the same time manageable classification of the skills and tasks that are needed to perform the job of the C-suite manager. It's almost like saying, what are all the possible activities that can go into this position. And the second step is to find a robust way that allows us to map the text that we found in the job adverts into these standardized skill categories. Step one is something that we solved using the ONET database. For those of you who are active in labor economics, you might have already seen this. This is, again, another wonderful product that is a data product that has been used extensively across many researchers. But basically, it's a dictionary. It gives you a very detailed sense of the tasks, skills, and activities that go into occupations. These occupations, about 1,000, they cover the entire economy, and each occupation is broken down into dozens of components, each of which comes with a text, a snippet it's a descriptor. So we take the description of the job for chief executives, and that gives us 68 components that span a wide range of CEO behaviors and ability. As you will see later on, we will then work with a subset of 6 clusters that are defined from these 68 components. But this is, very useful for us because it really gives us a very comprehensive way of all the possible tasks that may go into the job of the CEO. And so if you're curious, what goes into that, well, again, a variety of stuff. One is this very, operational, if you like, activities or monitoring activities, directing, planning, implementing policies of objectives, identifying system, measuring system performance. Others are much more, related to data, understanding data, and others are more of this softer stuff, persuading others to change their minds of behavior, or developing constructive and cooperative working relationships. So it's very rich also at that level. So once we have this rich description of what goes into the C-suite executive job, now we have the second challenge, which is mapping the job descriptions into these categories. A very simple approach would be to just look at word similarities and see, whether specific words overlap. However, and this is a problem that it's frequent in these type of approaches, that would leave a lot of information on the table. For example, a job description might have the word talk. Another one might have the word communicate. Essentially, we are talking about a similar activity. If we were to use a one-to-one word overlap, we would lose the fact that both job descriptions had essentially the same activity in them. So what do? We use word embeddings. Word embeddings are a really fascinating technique that describes language in terms of vectors. So actually, words are described as vectors whose dimensions encode some sort of sense of semantic similarity within them. In particular, what we have is that each term in the vocabulary is represented as a vector, and these individual vectors are the word embeddings. And terms with similar meaning have word embeddings that lie close to each other in this vector space. This is a phenomenal, we could go just for an hour just talking about this technique. Just think about all the possibilities that are open to you once you start expressing, language and semantic similarities in terms of, very quantitative and concrete measures. We don't innovate in how we estimate these word embeddings. We use a popular approach called word to vec. But we innovate in the way, in the training library that we use to estimate these word embeddings. As many of you might know, if you are in this space, you know that word embeddings, estimating word embeddings requires a large amount of data. And it's a larger amount of data that is much larger than what we have in our job ads. And we also didn't feel like we could use what's typically pre-estimated, like corpora, like Wikipedia, because the meaning of words in general English, it's typically different from what might be used in management. One concrete example: the word judgment in a word embedding estimated from Wikipedia would typically have a legal term. It would have some sort of legal sense. In a managerial context, you really want judgment to have something to say about decision-making and choosing among alternative opportunities more than judging from a legal standpoint. So rather than using the standard corpora like Wikipedia, we build an embedding space that is constructed using the Harvard Business Review corpus. Harvard Business Review is the Bible. Okay, I'm an HBS professor, so I might be biased. I'm sure that there are other outlets, but it's pretty good. It's the Bible of managerial articles. It's pretty rich. It covers 14,000 articles. It runs from 1922 to 2019. And it really gives us the opportunity to build a language model that is specifically managerial rather than generic. And if I had the time, I would take you into a detour into the beauty of this managerial word embeddings. I don't have the time now, but what I can tell you is that this is a separate output of our research, and the plan is to make all these word embeddings available to other researchers who are interested in using it for their own purposes. So let me tell you how we use the word embeddings in practice. A very first immediate use is that it allows us to, if you remember a couple of slides ago, I told you that ONET is pretty rich. It gives us 68 activities that would go into the chief executive job. The word embeddings, by giving us these semantic similarities, allow us to go from 68 activities to a much smaller and manageable set of 6 clusters. 6 clusters that express the 6 types of tasks or skills that are typically included in the job of a chief executive. The labels are ours, so it's, there is a level of arbitrariness in how you label them, but at a high level, what these 6 clusters denote is the following. First of all, a couple of very operational skills. For example, the management of material and financial resources, monitoring and controlling resources, overseeing the spending of money. It would be one of the snippets that is included here, just as an example. It also has other things that are a little bit more intensive in terms of cognitive activities. For example, monitoring of performance and information skills. Clearly, the chief executives are expected to do work in terms of monitoring the performance of themselves, but also of other individuals. They are also expected to be able to analyze information, to evaluate results, and so forth. And then the last 2 clusters have to do, as I was saying before, to the softer stuff. Some of it is what we would say is the classic management of human resources. Recruiting, interviewing, selecting, and hiring. A lot of this has to do with motivating people or finding people that are good fit for the organization. And then the last bit, it's these social skills, which ONET itself describes as social skills. One example that I love is the snippet that says, giving full attention to what other people are saying, taking time to understand the points being made, asking questions as appropriate, not interrupting at inappropriate times. I love that because to me, this is a description of a husband more than a CEO, but whatever, this is what CEOs are expected to do. It's a lot of these interactions and ability to really get what the other people are doing and build this sort of empathy with other people. Okay, so in a nutshell, what we have is a way to go from this rich but messy free text into some very concrete measures for each of the documents. And the measures that we developed and all that I'm going to describe from now onwards is essentially an indicator that tells you whether that specific skill is important or is present and important within the job description. So you should see, all the measures that I'm going to discuss from now onwards as a signal that the job description not only mentioned that cluster, but also the average similarity of that cluster in the job description is greater than the average similarity of the other cluster. So it's a measure of relative importance within the document. Clearly, these documents have some sort of correlation. So, documents that refer more to the softer skills or the HR and the social skills tend to have less of the administrative and monitoring, the more operational stuff. But this correlation is not perfect. And so that's why we consider them separately at 6 different indicators for each document. And one way to validate whether what we're doing is appropriate is to look across the different positions that are included in our corpus. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we have descriptions of positions for CEOs and CFOs, as well as other functional roles, chief information officers, chief marketing officers, chief human resource officers. And once you look at the relative importance of the different skills across these positions, you will see that they go a little bit as you would hope they would. For example, tasks that have to do with human resources and social skills are the most prominent in HR positions. On the other hand, the chief information officer, there is a lot of mentioning of information skills. And then, a couple of things that are interesting to notice how balanced the demand for skills is for CEOs. So the job of the CEO requires a little bit of everything, which is consistent with the idea that CEOs need to deal with different parts of the organization and internal and external stakeholders. And then the CFO is different from the CEO in the sense that they get to do, I would say they get to do more of the boring stuff. I'm not sure if a CFO would agree, but they have much more of this administrative role of really running the organization on a day-by-day basis. One piece of information that I think is fascinating emerging from this data is how the demand for the different skills has evolved over time. These are, each of these dot is basically telling you the relative importance of, in our corpus, of the different skills within the same industry and within the same country. So this is not driven by the changes in the composition of our sample, but what you see is that over time, the demand for social skills and information skills has really increased in these C-suite positions. More and more, there is an emphasis or mentioning of this type of skills relative to more operational skills, such as financial and material resources. Now, this doesn't mean that financial and material resources are not important anymore. Maybe they're taken for granted. But the issue is that they're not mentioned. And so we have, if you like, a little bit of a substitution between the doing versus the coordinating or motivating, persuading other people in these managerial job descriptions. So what do we make of that? To some extent, this is all descriptive. And, I think this is an interesting fact. It matches up with, maybe it matches up with your intuition. If you're following what's happening in the managerial literature, you will see that there is, even in the general literature, I think we talk much more about leadership these days than we would have, 10 or 20 years ago. For example, if you look at HBR itself, you see similar trends. This is, a way to codify the content of HBR using our technique. And again, you see that even within HBR, we have a lot more of social skills, articles that mention social skills and less of articles mentioning, doing stuff or running the day-by-day organization. So to some extent, I think that this is maybe, something that is happening overall. But I think that there is more to it. And in particular, the reason why we get into this additional exercise of thinking about modeling the demand for social skills and looking at which type of firms demand what, the data suggests a ton of heterogeneity. Of course, the averages are moving in one direction, but even within every year, within every industry, we still see a lot of heterogeneity, different firms asking for different things. And so we wanted to understand, what is it? Why is it? What is driving this different demand? As I said, we decided to focus specifically on social skills. It's a concept that it's much more related to psychology than it is to economics. In a nutshell, what do social skills capture? It's basically what psychologists call the theory of the mind, the ability to attribute mental states to others based on their behavior, or to put oneself in another's shoes. And David Deming at the Kennedy School has done a great, really fascinating job documenting how the demand for social skill is increasing across all levels of especially in the overall US economy. This is not just something that seems to be happening in the C-suite. It's a much more general phenomenon. In our data, it happens that these social skills are most demanded in CEO positions. And as I said, they're very heterogeneous across firms. The question is, why are they increasingly prominent? What might be driving it? As I said, one possible explanation is that this is just a fad, but that would run counter this massive heterogeneity that we see in the data. And so what we explore instead is the idea that social skills might actually be reflecting, the demand for social skill might actually be reflecting organizational needs, and in particular, the need to facilitate coordination within the firm. So we develop a model that sort of helps us make this point. And I won't go into the details of the model, but I want to give an intuition of what we have in mind. Basically, the idea is the following. Let's think about, how can social skills be helpful in a firm? Well, they are helpful, for example, if you think about production in a very abstract way, but you need to think about production as teamwork, as an output of teamwork. And in particular, a teamwork that requires communication between workers and managers. One way to do that, one way to think about this model is to think about management by exception. What does it mean? It means that when problems are simple enough, workers can solve them and deal with them on their own. But when problems become more complex or they go beyond the expertise of workers, then that's where you really need the input of the manager. So that's one way to think about team production along the hierarchy. Now, what these classes of model give you is that they place a really fundamental role to communication. Because you see, communication is needed to have this transfer of problem from the workers to the managers and vice versa, to let the manager be an expert. But the problem is that obviously managers are subject to a time constraint. And so these communication activities are feasible up to a point. And so this communication costs and the time constraint are the limiting factor, is what makes it hard for companies to achieve their optimal output. There is some sort of the communication does not happen to the extent that it should. So we think about social skills as a technology that improves the efficiency of communication. That's basically what there is. Instead of thinking about, technologies in terms of LAN or, internet and so forth, if you have better social skills in our model, you can transmit or receive information in more efficiently, meaning you need to spend less time in this sort of translation activities. So if you develop this logic, you can show formally that the marginal benefits of social skills. So when is it that having a good SEO with great social skills really matters, is when you have more problems to solve. And that's because the time constraint is really binding in those cases. So larger organizations. When managers have a lot on their plate besides just solving problems, for example, there is coordination activities that need to be done. And also when there are, and this is the role of technology in our model, when there are technologies that are really complementary to the skills of central managers, when the marginal benefit of the C-suite expertise is higher, then that's really important. Then having something that allows you to better communicate becomes really, really valuable. Empirically, this means looking at conditional correlations. Obviously, we don't have causality in this type of analysis, but what we are able to say is we can analyze the extent to which firm characteristics, for example, the size of the organization as a proxy for problem scope, or characteristics that we take as proxy for the need for greater central coordination, for example, being a multinational, being diversified, having done mergers and acquisitions, being a publicly listed firms, all proxies for this greater variety of activities which the C-suite needs to be engaged in. To what extent do they map into this demand for social skills? So empirically, what we find is that firms, the companies that tend to demand more of the social skills are on average larger. We don't find much in terms of diversification. This is, a very crude proxy. I'm sure we can do better than that. But also companies that are more engaged in M&A activities and companies that are public. So it seems like, and all these measures are firm characteristics prior to the search. So we are trying to mimic the set of information that is available to the board at the time in which they have to craft the job descriptions. So in a nutshell, these results seem to suggest that the demand for social skills is not random, but seems to be pretty correlated with firm characteristics, where the demand where really the ability of C-suite managers to communicate is very valuable. Another aspect that we considered in this analysis is the relationship between the demand for social skills in the C-suite level and information technology. And there are various reasons why we're interested in this question, but one of these reasons is that a priori, whether companies that are more invested in IT or less invested in IT, what's the relationship with the demand for social skills? That is a pretty complex question, in the sense that IT can complement the skills of middle managers. Actually, if you acquire technology that allows middle managers to make decisions on their own, in principle, you shouldn't even need C-suite managers. I mean, they are just, these decentralized agents. You probably don't need so much of this top-down involvement. On the other hand, and this, I think, has been argued by some, there is also, and specifically certain types of ITs may be great complements for top managers. I am thinking, for example, at technologies that really allow you to provide harmonized data to the C-suite, rather than leaving that information in the different subsidiaries. You now have the ability to have comparable data on the performance of the different subsidiaries. That gives you great oversight if you sit at the top of the organization. And so that, from that perspective, IT might also be a great complement to top-level managers. Those are the ones that might get greater benefits from this type of technologies. There is also a second argument, and this is something that I usually find Peter Drucker, who wrote about this stuff in the 60s, always valuable. But there's one aspect of what Drucker said. This is from 1967, and it was more of an observation. And I admit this is outside our modeling framework, but it's also this idea that the more information is collected in the firm, the more might actually be the need for communication. And that's why, well, because, you get a lot of data, but you lose the context, and you really don't know, a data point might be may actually be hiding a lot about the needs, the goals, the perceptions, and everything is reduced to a number, but there is a lot of context that it gets lost. So Peter Drucker's perspective on this is that actually in organizations that had more of this sort of standardized information or data collection, it would be even more valuable to have somebody who can communicate and get at that context that is not included in the data. So we get at that, this is more of an exploratory analysis, but our way to look at this question is to think about the differences across, in the demand for IT skills that firms have below the C-suite. So in other words, so far, all the analysis has been focused on the demand for skills at the level of the top of the organization, but there is a ton of information that is now available about the skills that are demanded below the C-suite. And for 700 firms of US-based searchers in our sample, we are actually able to see the extent to which the vacancies that are posted by the companies include the demand for specific IT skills. And we focus on pretty broad categories: information technology, which is, I think, pretty basic IT skills, as well as more advanced IT skills that are included in analysis. This would include AI, machine learning, data analysis, and so forth. And to our knowledge, this is the first time that we have this, analysis of both the C-suite and firm-wide skills analyzed together. So what we find is this pretty strong correlation between, firms that are more that in the data appear to demand more of these IT skills in their workforce are also the ones that demand more social skills in their CEOs. And this is, it's something that we find to be robust to a number of different measurement approaches, different techniques to think about IT adoption. So in the 2 minutes that are left before we get into the Q&A, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. You might wonder, is this really something that is present just for social skills, or is this are this relationship that I just described with firm size, need for coordination and IT present also for other types of skills? The bottom line is that what we find is pretty much a social skill phenomenon. So we don't find that, for example, the demand for other operational skills or even other soft skills like HR correlate with firm size and the other characteristics that we have the same way in which social skills do. The one exception is the demand for cognitive skills in the C-suite. If you can see, this is a table that, every number in this table is a different regression. So it's just a summary of all the results. But the companies that demand more are more technologically intensive from that standpoint of demand in their workforce, demand more of their social skills in the CEOs, but they also demand more cognitive abilities, these information skills. So from that perspective, these two categories of skills seem to be pretty complementary.
Yeah, Raffaella, if I could just go back to that. I mean, I think it's very striking the way that this pattern. I wouldn't have necessarily expected this in advance, but you also see, like, if you look at the monitoring performance column, there's a big negative coefficient with IT skills. I might have told the story before that IT lets you monitor things more carefully, but maybe that's the ability to do that with IT is more of a substitute than a complement.
Exactly.
And once you're able to do that with IT, maybe you don't need the CEO to spend as much time mastering that. And that certainly, that kind of story is even kind of more sensible for the administrative tasks, where hopefully IT is relieving some of the burden on some of the administrative stuff. But it's interesting. And I think that story that as IT takes over certain functions, there's sort of a residue or complementarity with the things that IT does not do well, that you ask the CEO to do more is a pretty striking pattern that could explain a lot of your columns.
Erik, this is exactly the interpretation that, and in fact, we were very happy to see this in the data. And, in a sense, the same way in which we think about other layers of the organization as if you like, a bundle of different tasks and different skills, you can apply exactly the same logic to C-suite positions. There is nothing magic about C-suite positions. It's a story of which type of tasks are best allocated at the top of the organization versus other layers of the organization versus technology.
Right. Terrific.
So I'll conclude. Just to, there is more in the paper. So, first of all, does this all make sense? Well, look, one way to make sense of the data was to talk with our partners from the headhunting firm. And it's actually really interesting. I mean, they see things from a different perspective, not with the data, but just by talking with their clients. And there is, I think, a sense in which what we've discussed today, the need for coordinating a greater number of stakeholders, partnerships, regulators, and so forth, may be creating a higher demand for social skills as well as technology. There is also a set of considerations that we are completely absent from our analysis right now, which is, really ESG, social value, purpose, and all that may be also a driver, the need to deal with these more complex factors. At the end of the day, I hope I gave you, a better sense of what goes into the demand for C-suite managers. And as I said, I think the keyword is variety and heterogeneity. But also the increasing importance of social skills, which I don't think, I didn't have a true sense for that prior to, doing this analysis, and also how social skills really fit into this, broader sense of production and technology adoption. Obviously, there is still a lot to do. And, going back to the motivating research question, understanding the functioning of labor markets, I think that this is also, the question that I have is, to what extent the demand for C-suite executives seems to be quite sophisticated. Is it maybe too sophisticated? To what extent are we able to really assess candidates with good social skills? And could this be paradoxically maybe an open door for bias? I'm thinking about how do I evaluate if somebody has social skills or not? Well, maybe I go play football with them, and that would immediately exclude a big chunk of candidates for the assessments. Do social skills matter for managerial compensation? But I think the really important question is, do they matter for firm performance? And so if that's the case, then I believe that the next step is, how do you improve the screening approaches? How do you go, how do you solve for this extreme, I think, informational asymmetry that you have between candidates and firms? I'll stop here, and I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Raffaella. That was just terrific. Such a rich set of data and rich set of issues that you're bringing up. Just want to remind people that I see some questions are coming in from Q&A. Anybody who wants to ask a question, please post it there. And let me go ahead and read a couple of them. So Anupam Khanna asks, an interesting question would be to compare managers in the private versus public sector, and whether or not there's a difference in the demand for social skills. Anupam has a hypothesis, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. So you can say if you looked at that and whether. Yeah,
we looked at that. I mean, we looked a little bit at health. We do have a big chunk of companies there. And I think it's fascinating. We find that there is much more bureaucracy that goes into those positions, and not as much, not a lot of difference in terms of social skills, but definitely much more, if you remember, of the administrative tasks. And I don't know if that's the hypothesis that she had.
Well, her hypothesis was that there would be more social skills in the public sector. But I think you raised an interesting point, just from my limited interaction, that there may be, the public sector may have to comply with a lot of rules when they post things.
Exactly.
So the postings may be a little less informative, or there may be other things going on there in terms of how maybe they are informative. Maybe that's what they need, is to compliance with rules. And then there's a question, which I think you've already touched on a little bit, but you can add more. Mukesh Dali asks, first off, he says, excellent presentation. To what extent can you say more about deeply analyzing the information skills and monitoring performance the way you did with social skills? So I think you touched on this a little bit, but maybe add a little bit more about the richness of the way of analyzing information skills versus social skills.
Yeah, so that was, that very crowded table that I was showing at the end with all the different coefficients. We are very interested in that. We found that with the exception of information skills and technology, the coefficient that Erik noticed before, monitoring and administration and all that, we find that a lot of what we have to say on this firm level analysis is specific to social skills. There is one element of the analysis that I have not mentioned, which is also, using the companies that have been on the market for other positions. We also can have a sense of the complementarity of skills within the C-suite. So, if you demand for, more social skills in the CEO, what type of skills do you look for in your other C-suite positions? And what we find there is some evidence of, the sample is not huge, so, you want to be careful, but assortative matching, meaning, organizations that tend to ask for more social skills or more information skills in the C-suite for the CEO tend to do it also for other positions.
Yeah, that's interesting. It'd be interesting to take it even one step further. I mean, you referred to Deming's work on finding more social skills in the workforce in general. And as you see it rising in the C-suite, I wonder if it's rising faster or slower than the rest of the workforce. Is this something that's just happening in the economy overall, or is it disproportionately at one end or the other? I know that the metrics aren't exactly comparable, but you might be able to get a general sense on that.
Yeah.
You also, for most of the analyses you show, I think all of them, you had industry fixed effects, but I could also imagine there'd be some big differences across different industries. You probably ran some without the industry effects.
Yeah, that was, related to that first question. So I think, what we find is not surprising in the sense that, for example, more operational skills tend to be greater in manufacturing relative to other industries, not so much in terms of social skills though. So we don't find a ton of heterogeneity across, it's more within. One piece, you didn't ask me, but one aspect is also we can look across countries. And so we can see whether the job descriptions in the United States, for example, to what extent do they vary to job descriptions for the same position in other countries. And there's something that I think is fascinating is the fact that the demand for social skills is very much a US, Canada, Australia type of phenomenon.
Interesting.
Countries like, obviously I'm European, I'm interested in that. I mean, there, the job of the CEO is very much an operational role.
Yeah.
Much less of this, soft stuff and coordinating stuff. And no, the CEO, you have to do and monitor and do stuff directly.
One of the C-level people I didn't see on your chart was COO. So the company, I've been a couple of boards of companies, and we had a COO and I think the CEO tried to get the COO to do most of the operational stuff.
Yeah.
Did you ever look at those separately or not?
We don't have those positions in our sample. We don't have job descriptions for COO in our sample. Yeah, but that would be another. I think the CFO basically takes a lot of those more.
Yeah, often the CFO ends up, and different CEOs have different styles. When we were hiring people, the recruiters, we could see some of them were more the vision type of person, and others were more hands-on. And sometimes there's depending if you hire one or the other, they try to find complementary people to fill in the missing parts.
Yeah, it's very much like a team approach to hiring.
Another thing, that's happened over the years, I think the movie Moneyball that all of us management professors enjoyed watching, I think it came out about 10 years ago, and it's not just for sports, of course, it's everything is becoming data and metrics oriented. Again, when I was looking for a CEO, it was very frustrating for me how little of that was being done, but more and more over time, they're trying to quantify metrics. It's harder for CEOs than it is for maybe a baseball player, but it can be done. And I wonder to what extent some of that may be creeping into the job descriptions, that the way you'd assess someone's social skills used to be, maybe you go to dinner with them and see their social skills. And now they're trying to find ways of making it more of a quantified element of the job description. Do you think that part of it may be an artifact of the things that we're measuring, or how can you distinguish measurement versus real change?
This is a great question. I think my prior is, if this is just a marketing, it goes back to the point, is this just a fad? The fad hypothesis, I don't think would match up with the type of heterogeneity that we see in the data. Mm-hmm. And the other piece, which I didn't get the time to explain, is that if you remember, I told you we have also firms that appear multiple times in the data. Mm-hmm. And so for them, we can see directly, is social skills just something that is added, or is it also something that is subtracted from the job description? To me, the second type of pattern would give me more confidence that you're not just adding a term that has to be there, but you sort of think about it, and we find that there is a good amount of addition and there is also a good amount of subtraction, and that these changes are correlated with the firm size. For example, changes in firm size within the same firm. So I think that, it's possible that there is a little bit of that. I don't think it's the whole story, though, based on what we've seen.
And you described how the types of IT folks in the firm is just, associated with the kinds of social skills and whatever. I'm wondering, since you have a time panel here, to what extent, I hesitate to call it causal, but you can pick up to the extent to which one affects the other. In fact, it may be that hiring a certain kind of CEO leads, part of their job is to change the organization, leads to changes in the kinds of technology or skills that they have over time. It's obviously kind of endogenous that maybe they had a vision to do that, but you see, and I think it's probably a future paper, but do you have any opportunities to look at
we don't do it right now. We don't do it right now, but I agree. This is a future paper, and something that maybe even with a larger sample we could do. Remember, we only have 700 of these match firms, but I admit, at least in my case writing and more anecdotal evidence, I do believe that a lot of the times these digital transformation initiatives are very much related to the nature of who is at the top and with the type of vision and what they have in mind. Obviously, actually, I believe that the most successful ones that I've seen have this type of characteristics. There is like some sort of top-down vision that is articulated over time. So I wouldn't be surprised to find something like that.
Yeah. So we have another question from Anapa Pamkana. Have you tried to relate this to the literature on implicit theories of leadership, especially cross-cultural comparisons of Europe and America? Again, you touched on that a little bit.
Right. So I'm not going to pretend that I know exactly what implicit theories of leadership are, but I do believe that there is something to say about cross-cultural differences in leadership. And one point on the difference between Europe and the States that I think is interesting is, as you know, Erik, I also do a lot of cross-country comparisons in management practices. And what is fascinating is that, when we look at management practices, Europe is not necessarily at the top of the rankings that we create. And those management
your world
practices,
management survey. Well, tell us, give us 30 seconds of your world management survey and how that connects.
Yeah, so we basically, we measure the adoption of basic management practices correlated with productivity across 34 countries and, thousands of organizations. And then, with this data, you can look at how management quality varies across countries. So the result I was referring to is that I really do wonder, I have no ways to look at it in this paper, but I do wonder what happens if you think that the operational role has to be at the C-suite level rather than at middle managerial levels. Is there maybe an opportunity there to think about, how are European companies organized, and is there an appropriate delegation of decision-making authority happening from the C-suite to other levels of the organization? It's all speculative. I've done work on organizations too, but something to do for the future for sure.
Yeah, well, this is so much rich work that you're doing here, and the data set's just amazing. I can see a lot of opportunities coming out of it. So thank you for sharing that with us, and we'll look forward to the other papers. People can, I guess we'll put a link to it in our online so people can read more about it. Thank you very much, Raffaella. We very much appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. Great being here. Thank you.
And I also want to say that we have a couple of presentations coming up on Wednesday. We have Philippe Aguillon coming in, and he's going to be speaking at 11 a.m. in a special session about the power of creative destruction, a new book that he has coming out. And next Monday, the seminar continues with Daron Acemoglu, who's going to be talking about remaking the post-COVID world. So I hope to see all of you this coming Wednesday at 11 and next Monday at 12 noon Pacific time. Thanks again, Raffaella. That was terrific.
Bye, Erik. See you. Bye-bye.